3 days after I buried my father-in-law slid a cashier's check across the kitchen table and told me the number on it was more than fair. $2 million, written out in full. For your fresh start, he said, like he was doing me a favor. My son was upstairs. He had just turned 4 months old. I could hear the baby monitor crackling on the counter behind me. I looked at my father-in-law, this man I'd called Dad for 6 years, and I said, "I'm sorry, I don't understand what this is for." He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands the way he always did before he delivered verdicts. He was a real estate developer out of Charlotte. He had that habit of making everything sound like a closing statement. "Megan," he said, "you're a smart woman. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." My husband was standing by the window. He didn't turn around. I want to pause here because I need you to understand something about where I was at that moment. My father had died 4 days earlier after 18 months of fighting pancreatic cancer. I had driven back and forth between our house in Raleigh and my parents' place in Asheville every single weekend for a year and a half while also working full-time and taking care of a newborn. I had not slept more than 4 hours in a row since September. I was running on grief and cold coffee and the particular kind of numbness that sets in when too many hard things happen too close together. So when my father-in-law pushed that check toward me, my first thought wasn't anger. It was confusion. Pure, exhausted confusion. "What exactly," I said slowly, "is this supposed to be for?" He looked at my husband. My husband finally turned from the window, and the look on his face told me everything before he said a single word. His name was Joel. We met in law school. Well, I was in law school. He was finishing his MBA at the same university. We got married at 29. We had the kind of relationship that looked great on paper and mostly felt great in real life, or at least I thought it did. Joel was charming and ambitious, and his family had money going back 3 generations in North Carolina real estate. His father, Robert, had always been polite to me, maybe a little formal, but I had never once felt unwelcome. Until that morning. "Dad and I have been talking," Joel said. He was still standing across the room, and I remember thinking it was strange that he wouldn't come closer. "About the future. About what makes sense. What makes sense," I repeated. "You're grieving. You're exhausted. We both know things haven't been good between us for a while." That part was true. Things had been strained. Between the pregnancy, my father's illness, the long-distance trips to Asheville, we had grown into roommates who loved the same baby. I knew we needed work. I had been planning to suggest couples counseling once things settled down. I had not been planning for this. "Are you telling me you want a divorce?" I asked. I said it so quietly I almost didn't hear myself. Joel didn't answer. His father answered. "We think it would be best for everyone," Robert said, "including the baby. You'd have more than enough to get back on your feet. Find a place near your mother. Be close to family. Fresh start, like I said." There was a long silence. The baby monitor made a soft crackling sound. My son was still asleep upstairs. "You want me to take money," I said, "and leave." "We want to make this easy," Robert said. "And the baby?" Another silence, longer this time. "Joel would want to be involved," Robert said carefully. "Appropriate visitation. We'd work it out through attorneys, keep it civil." I looked at my husband one more time. He was looking at the floor. I stood up. I picked up the check. I folded it in half and I put it in my cardigan pocket. I said, "I need some time to think." Robert looked satisfied. Joel looked relieved. Neither of them said anything as I walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs to get my son. Here is what they did not know about me. Before I had my son, before I put my legal career on hold to care for my father through treatment and to get through a high-risk pregnancy, I had spent 4 years as a family law attorney in Raleigh. I specialized in high-asset divorce. I had sat across the table from men exactly like Robert dozens of times. I knew every move in this playbook before he opened his mouth. And I had spent 18 months watching my father, a retired CPA who taught me to read a balance sheet before I could drive, lose his ability to do the work he loved. In his last few weeks, when he could barely sit up, he would ask me to bring him documents from the file cabinet in his office. His handwriting got shaky, but his mind stayed sharp. He was meticulous. He wanted to make sure everything was in order for my mother, for me, for our family. What my father-in-law did not know was that my father had also helped me understand exactly what I was married into. 2 years before, when Joel and I were discussing having a child, my father had quietly asked me if I had reviewed the family trust documents. Not because he was suspicious of Joel, he liked Joel, but because he was my father, and he believed everyone should understand what they're walking into. I had reviewed them, all of them. Robert controlled a family trust that had been set up by Joel's grandfather. Under the terms, Joel would receive a significant transfer of assets when he turned 40, about 3 years away, provided he met certain conditions. One of those conditions was that any divorce settlement involving marital assets could not include claims against trust property, but only if the divorce was finalized before the transfer date. In other words, Robert was trying to get Joel divorced before the trust transferred, so I couldn't touch it. The $2 million wasn't generosity, it was a discount. I nursed my son in his room that afternoon and I made a plan. The first call I made was to my closest friend from law school, a woman named Tessa who now ran a family law firm in Charlotte. Not my market, not my conflict of interest. I laid out the situation. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "How fast do you need me?" "Fast," I said. The second call I made was to my mother. My mother is 63 years old and she has been through more than most people twice her age. She lost my father. She raised my brother and me mostly on one income after my father's accounting practice went under when I was 12. She is not a woman who wastes time on sentiment when there is work to be done. "Tell me what you need," she said. What I needed was a place to go that wasn't obvious. I needed time to work without Joel or Robert knowing I was working. My mother's house in Asheville was 4 hours away, and no one in Joel's family would think to look for me there right away because they assumed, I think, that I was too grief-stricken to do anything but cry. That was their first mistake. I took 2 days. I packed what I needed for my son, loaded the car while Joel was at his father's office, and left a note on the counter that said I needed space to process and would be in touch. Not a lie, not a door closed. Then I drove west on I-40 with my son sleeping in his car seat and my laptop open on the passenger seat with Tessa on speakerphone for 3 hours of that drive. Here is what we found. Robert had been moving assets. Not dramatically, not in a way that would trigger automatic flags, but steadily over about 18 months. Properties transferred into subsidiary LLCs, a consulting fee arrangement with a company that appeared to be connected to a cousin's holding group. It was careful work. It was the kind of thing that takes someone who knows what they're looking for. My father had known what to look for. He had flagged 2 of these transfers 2 years before he died, and he had documented them in a folder labeled with my name and the word reference in his careful, cramped handwriting. He left that folder in his office file cabinet. He told me once, in a moment that felt offhand, but probably wasn't, where it was. I had the folder. Tessa had a forensic accountant she trusted. Within a week, we had a preliminary picture that was not good for Robert. The other thing we found had nothing to do with money. It had to do with why Joel was standing by that window instead of looking at me. Joel had been seeing someone. Her name wasn't relevant. What was relevant was that she worked in his father's company, that the relationship had apparently been ongoing for about 8 months, and that Robert was aware of it. The divorce offer wasn't just about the trust. It was about clearing the way. That knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. I won't tell you I cried because I did in the shower at my mother's house at 2 in the morning while my son slept in the pack and play 3 feet away. I cried the way you cry when something confirms a fear you didn't know you had. But by morning, I was back at the laptop. Joel's attorneys reached out 10 days after I left. Very civil, very professional. They were operating under the assumption that I was a grieving, sleep-deprived new mother who had taken the check and just needed a little time to formally agree. They laid out a proposed settlement. It included the $2 million, a custody arrangement that gave Joel every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer, and a clause waiving any claims against trust assets. I read it. I forwarded it to Tessa. Then I called my mother-in-law. I want to explain this choice because I know it sounds strange. Robert was the architect of all of it. Joel was, at minimum, a willing participant. But Joel's mother, a woman named Sandra, she had not been in that kitchen. She had not been part of that conversation, and in 6 years, Sandra had always been kind to me. She used to call just to check in after my father's diagnosis. She had flown up to be with us the week my son was born. I didn't know if she knew. I needed to find out. She answered on the second ring. I told her calmly and simply what had happened. The kitchen table, the check, the proposed settlement I had just received. I told her about the asset transfers. The silence on her end of the line was a different kind of silence than the one in the kitchen. "Say that again," she said. "About the assets." I said it again. Sandra was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I need to make some calls. Can I call you back tonight?" She called back at 9:15. "I didn't know about the check," she said, "or the settlement offer. I knew about the other woman. Robert told me it was handled." "It wasn't handled," I said. "No," she said. "I can see that. I don't know exactly what happened between Sandra and Robert in the weeks that followed, and I didn't ask. What I know is that Robert's attorney sent a very different letter to Tessa about 2 weeks later. The tone had changed considerably. Joel, it turned out, had also had a conversation with his mother that recalibrated certain things. He was not a bad man, I don't think, so much as a weak one who had let his father make one too many decisions for him. When the picture became clear, what his father had actually been doing, what I actually knew, what the forensic accountant had actually found, Joel went very quiet for a very long time. He called me on a Tuesday. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the kitchen, for all of it. I don't know. I should have been different." I let that sit. "I want to be a good father," he said. "Whatever happens between us, I want that." "Then that's where we start," I said. The divorce took 8 months. It was not clean. Nothing with Robert involved was ever going to be clean, but it was a great deal better than $2 million and every other weekend. The forensic accounting work Tessa's firm had done gave us significant leverage in negotiations. The asset transfers were documented. Robert's attorney was clearly eager to avoid discovery proceedings. We reached a settlement that was considerably more reflective of the actual marital estate, including the value of assets that had been quietly moved in the 18 months before the divorce was proposed. I got the house in Raleigh, or I got to stay in it. I got a settlement that would keep my son and me stable for years. I got a custody arrangement that was actually built around my son's needs, not Robert's preferences. Robert got what people who overplay their hand in negotiations usually get, less than they would have received if they'd been fair in the first place. Sandra called me when it was finalized. "I hope you know I'm still his grandmother," she said. "I'd like to be if you'll let me." "He needs his grandmother," I told her, and I meant it. Joel and I have figured out a version of co-parenting that works. It is not warm exactly, but it is functional and mostly kind, which is more than I could have hoped for that morning in the kitchen. He is a present father. My son knows his dad. My mother still has that folder my father made for me. She offered to let me take it home after everything was settled. I told her to keep it there. I like the idea of it being in his office with his handwriting on the tab. There is something I've thought about a lot since all of this. Not the legal strategy, not the numbers, but the moment in the kitchen when I picked up that check and put it in my pocket. Robert thought I was retreating. Joel thought I was crumbling. I was memorizing everything. Every word, every careful phrase, every telling silence. I was the lawyer I'd trained to be, walking out of a deposition with more than I'd walked in with. My father used to say that the difference between panic and patience is just information. When you know what you're dealing with, you don't have to react. You can move. My son is 14 months old now. He took his first steps 2 weeks ago across the kitchen floor in my mother's house. Reaching for a wooden spoon, she was waving at him like a flag. She cried. I cried. My father would have loved every second of it. I didn't let someone else define what my family was worth. My son will know that one day, when he's old enough to hear the story, and when he asks me what I did when things got hard, I'm going to tell him the truth. I took the check, I went to get my baby, and I got to work. There's something I keep coming back to, even now, not the settlement, not the documents or the depositions or any of the legal machinery that ground through those 8 months. What I keep coming back to is that kitchen table, the way Robert folded his hands, the way Joel stayed by the window. They looked at me and they saw grief. They saw someone depleted, someone who had just lost her father and was running on nothing and holding a 4-month-old baby, and probably, in their calculation, someone who would take the path of least resistance because what else could she do? What they didn't see was who had raised me. My father spent his whole career watching people make decisions based on incomplete information. He used to say the most expensive thing a person can do is assume they already know the answer. Robert assumed. Joel let him. And that assumption that I was only what I appeared to be in that moment, exhausted and soft, cost them a great deal more than $2 million. I think about integrity a lot when I think about what my father left me. Not the folder in his file cabinet, though that mattered. His actual integrity. The way he showed up the same whether anyone was watching or not. The way he documented things carefully, not because he expected to need them, but because it was the right way to handle things. He wasn't preparing a weapon for me. He was just being himself. The fact that it became something I could use was a side effect of who he was. That's the thing about living with real honesty. It compounds. It builds something other people can stand on long after you're gone. And then there's the part that took me longer to make peace with, the part that wasn't just about knowing what to do. It was about having the steadiness to do it slowly when everything in me wanted to react. The morning after that kitchen conversation, I could have called Joel's office. I could have called an attorney right then and filed something aggressive before I even understood what I was dealing with. That impulse was there. I felt it. But I had watched my father manage his illness with the same deliberate patience he brought to everything else. He didn't catastrophize. He gathered information. He made decisions in order. And those last months, when he had so little energy, he spent it on what actually mattered and let the rest go. I learned more about clear thinking from watching him handle dying than from anything I read in law school. So I took the check and I went upstairs and I got my son. And then I drove 4 hours and I started working. Tessa used to joke that the best asset I brought to any negotiation was that I was never in a hurry when the other side thought I was panicking. That's not a natural gift. That's a practice. You build it by watching someone you love model it over and over until it's just part of how you move through hard things. My son is going to grow up knowing his great-grandfather through stories. He'll hear about the folder in the file cabinet. He'll hear about the drive west on I-40. He'll hear about his grandmother waving a wooden spoon across the kitchen floor. And I hope, when the time comes and something hard lands in front of him, he'll remember that the people who loved him showed him exactly what to do. Understand what you're dealing with, hold your ground with quiet hands, and do not let anyone else write the number on what you're worth. That's the only inheritance that matters.